إذا استحالت من أين المناص شرار الورى وسوف ترى بعقر ديار.
Horrific doesn't go far enough to describe what happened to the Jordanian pilot that you just saw, except the Jordanians feel that they're getting some measure of revenge by killing a couple of terrorists, hanging them as well. Robert Spencer joins us. He's the director of Jihad Watch. Robert, I was almost ill when I saw the first video. Slick production, but horrific in nature. What do you think?
They intended it to be horrific. They want it to be horrific. They want to follow the Quran's command to strike terror into the hearts of the enemies of Allah. And they want to show young Muslims that they are doing that and retaliating with the punishment with which they were hit, which is also a Quranic command. If they believe that this pilot was dropping incendiary devices over holdings of the Islamic State, then to burn him alive is entirely in accord with Quranic directives. And if they show that they're doing that, they will attract more recruits among young Muslims in the West and elsewhere.
Now, ISIS, I mean, they produced something like this. The word is that this was produced on January the 3rd, and yet they were holding out that Jordanian pilot as a potential exchange. They're flat out liars, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. They were hoping to get the 200 million first, or the release of Sajida al-Rashawi. And they didn't care in the least that they would not be able to uphold their part of the bargain, because it is simply not a matter of concern for them. Muhammad, the apostle, the prophet of Islam, he concluded a treaty called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah with a non-Muslim group in the year 628, and he broke it when it became to his advantage to do so. And that became the basis of all treaty making in Islam. You make a deal with unbelievers only when it's advantageous to you, and if you need to break it, you break it.
Wow. Okay. Now, in retaliation, in revenge, if you will, Jordan executes 2 terrorists, including a female bomber. I'd love your thoughts on that revenge component.
Well, this is a religion in which the Quran also says an eye for an eye, life for a life, and so on, as the Old Testament does. And there are groups that take this quite seriously. The Jordanian government is signaling to the Islamic State that they are following that, which may be an attempt to get them to stop making war against Jordan, showing that they're abiding by Islamic norms. But it also is intended to be a signal that they're going to respond strongly. They've, of course, promised a much stronger response, and so maybe more is to come.
Okay, but if that's the case, does it have popular support in Jordan, the revenge component?
Yeah, a lot of people are very angry about this in Jordan, and there's a lot of support right now for a very strong strike against the Islamic State. That said, over the last few months, there have been a number of reports about whole towns in Jordan that are showing allegiance to the Islamic State. And so obviously they are not going to be happy about any kind of strong response at all. And this is something the king has to weigh.
Well, exactly. I mean, people say that the vast majority now of people in Jordan are Palestinian by nature, and they don't support the revenge for component of this. They don't support Jordan being in the coalition in the first place, do they?
No. What Western leaders are not facing is the fact that the Islamic State has broad support all around the Islamic world. It styles itself as the new caliphate, and the caliphate is the supreme allegiance to which Muslims owe on earth. And so if people believe that it is the caliphate, or if they can sustain their claim to be the caliphate by simply continuing to exist for an extended period, as they have so far, then they're going to attract a lot of support. This is why we've seen hundreds of Muslims going from Canada, from the United States, from elsewhere in the West, to join up with the Islamic State, when we never saw them going in such numbers to join al-Qaeda or other jihad groups. And so it's the same thing here. These countries like Jordan have to weigh the support that the Islamic State has in their own countries against their desire to keep their own power and keep it from encroaching upon their domains.
Robert, I do want to continue this discussion, especially within the context of the coalition, because it's got Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, as well as Jordan, but we'll be right back.
With all sadness and tragic, we received the news and also anger, the news, the martyrdom of the hero pilot Mu'adh al-Kasasbi. It is the duty of all the sons and daughters of Jordan to stand together in one rank and show the true metal of the Jordanian people.
That's King Abdullah of Jordan talking about the execution of his pilot and what the nation should do in retribution. We've been talking about that with Robert Spencer. Now, Robert, here's the thing. You've got Bahrain, you've got Saudi Arabia, you've got UAE as well as Jordan fighting on side of the coalition basically since last September, I guess it was. Now you've got stories that UAE is upset by two things. First off, they think there should be more American support in terms of these planes that can get in and do search and rescues, as is the case with the Jordanian pilot, but also because Iran is too heavily involved. I'm confused. I thought Iran was not on our side.
Yeah, you know, the Iranians and this coalition have the mutual interest of both wanting to destroy the Islamic State. But the problem is, of course, that the UAE and the others that you mentioned are Sunnis and Iran is Shiite. And apparently the UAE knows something more than we do, but it's not in the least surprising since Barack Obama has so assiduously courted the Iranians and tried to get them to be involved in this coalition. Apparently they have more of a role than has been publicly announced. And there's a great deal, of course, about this that has not been publicly announced. I mean, even the fact that the UAE stopped its participation in the airstrikes, that's only coming out now, but they actually stopped it when the Jordanian pilot was first kidnapped, saying that there wasn't sufficient support for these pilots if they were shot down. And so only now is this coming out. I think we're going to be hearing more in the near future about Iran's role in this, which is something very objectionable to the Sunnis.
Okay, but that would suggest that Iran is more trying to overthrow Assad in Syria, isn't it?
Yeah, Iran wants to use this fight against the Islamic State to preserve the Assad regime in Syria, which is their ally. And the Sunnis want the Assad regime in Syria to be gone. And so ultimately, a coalition that would include Iran would be absolutely unworkable. But of course, the Americans, with their general blithe disregard of the beliefs and motives of all of these groups, are underestimating that as a potential difficulty.
Oh, yeah, and I'm having a hard time understanding it, to be honest with you, anybody's position on this, because what it sounds like is it breaks down to a holy war involving Muslim against Muslim.
Yeah, it's a Sunni Shiite thing, and this is why it's interesting to note that Muslim groups in the United States said if you're going to move against the Islamic State, the best way to do it would be to topple Assad. And that, of course, is not the mission at all. But their contention is that the Islamic State only exists to fight against Assad, which is in itself false and ignores the Islamic State statements about taking over and ruling the whole region and restoring the caliphate and so on. But it makes clear the agenda of these Muslim groups in the U.S. as well as in Canada, that what they really want is Assad gone because they're Sunni and he is supported by the Shiite Iranians.
Yeah. You know, maybe the solution all along was to cordon this whole area off and let them go at it.
Well, you know, it has to be said, without meaning to be callous at all, but certainly if the Sunnis and the Shiites are fighting against each other, then they're not, neither one of them is going to be able to devote as much time and resources as they have been devoting to strikes against the U.S. and Canada, Britain, and Western Europe.
Yeah, with the caveat that they tell their lone wolves out there to go and create havoc.
Well, sure, exactly. But if they're more involved with fighting Shiites in Iraq, then maybe they won't be issuing these calls for lone wolf attacks in the West because they'll be consumed with the conflict there. But of course, this is something that we're not really going to see happen because no Western leaders seem willing to allow that to play out, even though it is a 1,400-year-old conflict between Sunni and Shiite that we're not going to solve in this lifetime or any other. But nonetheless, they're not willing to let that play out and try to work it to our own advantage.
Well, no, but it does give credence now, or increase credence to the role of Israel in the area, in that, you know, what are the Americans doing dabbling in this area when, as you point out, they haven't been able to solve it for thousands of years and probably never will? I mean, what's Israel's role?
Well, Israel's role is to survive, and Israel is just standing by and watching this all unfold because the Islamic State has already amassed troops on the border with Israel. and would love to go into Israel and has actually vowed to do so once it consolidates its power in Iraq and Syria. And so this is something the Israelis have to take seriously. But, of course, the idea of working with Iran to fight against this is out of the question for Israel. They have to deal with things more realistically.
Yeah, absolutely true. And ditto for Turkey, or where did they play out?
Well, Turkey has been a remarkably unreliable ally. Barack Obama and John Kerry have repeatedly called upon them to help us against the Islamic State, and they've repeatedly refused. And they have allowed many, many fighters to cross from Turkey into Syria to join the Islamic State. And it seems likely that Erdogan, in wanting to restore the caliphate himself, where it last was in Istanbul, wants to use the Islamic State to beat the Kurds and to beat other enemies of Turkey as he sees them in the region, and then he hopes to be able to go in and enjoy the spoils of their victory.
Wow, Robert. You know, next time I talk to you, I'm going to have to bring some kind of a diagram that explains all those relationships. But thank you very much for walking me through those.
Always a pleasure, Pat. Thank you.
Robert Spencer.